Welcome to Rev MD, a podcast created for healthcare professionals by healthcare professionals. We will share tips on medical billing and coding, as well as workflow optimization to help practices succeed, thrive, and grow revenue. All right, welcome everybody to another week of Rev MD. I am so excited to have a guest, Dr. Mogan, who's going to talk about credit card processing and all kinds of amazing things that her company, Park Place Payments, does. Well, I appreciate you coming on. I mean, I kind of felt like, just with everything you've been doing, it's funny, just being a physician yourself and how you explained things to Troy and I was so awesome. I was blown away. I mean, especially because it's such a complicated area. And so without further ado, thank you so much, Jennifer, for being on this morning.
Oh, thank you so much for inviting me.
I have to ask, please start with just, you're a physician yourself, introduce yourself, talk a little bit about your career, and then what you're doing now with Park Place.
Yeah, so I am an anesthesiologist. I've been in private practice for the past 15 years since residency, or actually 16 years now. Wow. And the past couple of years, I kind of had the opportunity to learn about something totally outside of medicine. And I mean, all of us have kind of had our heads in the sand for a while, I think, and the opportunity to learn something outside of medicine doesn't really present itself, and you really don't have that much time, I would say, to do that sort of stuff. And so kind of COVID gave us that little bit of time to explore other things. Yeah. And so, I kind of fell into this world of payment processing through a really good friend who helped to start this company. And the more I learned about what is involved in payments and how it can really affect our bottom line as physicians, the more I was, excited to share that knowledge with people so that I could help them with their businesses as well. And it's just fun to do something outside of medicine, stimulate your brain in a totally different way.
Totally agree. I mean, that's kind of one of the, reasons we enjoyed opening National Revenue Consulting was just, it's something else that we can contribute in the healthcare realm, but it's not directly related to, seeing a patient, for example. So it's, I totally understand that. So what, during COVID, right, you're, exploring this, what is something that you've really enjoyed working for Park Place? And tell me a little bit about the company and how it began.
Yeah, so Park Place is a female-founded company, female-run, and truly the reason that it was started was because the payments industry has for years been a very somewhat poorly regulated, but I don't want to use the word shady so much as like just a non-transparent sort of industry. Basically, the less that you know as a merchant, the better it is for the payment processing companies because they can charge you whatever they want. They can change things along the way and you really don't know any better. And unless you have some sort of knowledge about the payment space, you're just going along for the ride. And so Park Place was out to change that, to make it so that merchants are educated about their payments. They're a part of the process. They understand how the payment space works and what would be the factors that are best for your business, because every business, you have different priorities, you have different needs. And so it's not a one size fits all thing. And so the goal of Park Place is to, number one, educate you, number two, help you make the right choices. And number three, be your partner in this so that you know that you're being taken care of and not taken for a ride. And that's what I liked about it because, being in medicine, we're very type A control freaks, I would say.
Yes.
We like to be in charge. We like to know all of the information that we can so that we can make our own decisions. We don't want to be sold to. We don't want someone telling us what's best for us. We want to make that decision ourselves. And so in a way, through Park Place, I'm able to help physicians make this decision for what's best for them. And that's been very refreshing for me because it's transparent. There's integrity behind it. And that's why I'm able to stand behind it. And then it was something that it's not like the other companies where you have quotas to fill or, it's a hard sell or anything. It's flexible enough that I can do it on my own time. So I can continue to have my career in medicine and along the side, however I can fit it in, I can, work at Park Place. So it's it's a great side gig for me, and very gratifying.
That's really cool. And it's nice that you can continue to work in clinical medicine, have this that you do on the side that kind of fulfills that, kind of yearning for more, I don't
Right.
know. So then how does having the right partner for credit card processing lead to growing the practice's revenue?
You think about this and you think it's maybe just a small decision for your business, but there really are a lot of ways that having the right processor can influence your revenue. I would say the obvious one is, making sure you're not overpaying in your fees. And that can be a direct hit to your bottom line if you are. But how do you know if you're overpaying? And that's the hard part, because it's very much, you look at your merchant statement, if you look at it at all. A lot of people I've run into don't even know they get a merchant statement or should get a merchant statement or how to access their merchant statement. But basically, for any business that is processing credit card transactions, you should get a statement every month that shows what you're paying in fees. And it will be more or less detailed depending on the type of pricing model that you're using. And we can get into those details in a minute. But just at least even knowing that you have a statement and taking a look at it so that you know what you're paying is step number one. But then trying to, delineate or decipher what you're paying on that is a totally different beast. And we have analysts in our back end that we can send that to so that they can look through and figure out what kind of pricing model you're on, how much you're paying in rates, how much you're paying in fees, and then just compare it against a fair standard. Because, even if you consider yourself a savvy shopper and you're like, you know what, I'm going to go do my comparison shopping, and you go to 3 different processing companies, maybe you go to your bank because, you've established a great relationship with them, and they say, oh yeah, we'll take care of you. And we'll give you a tiered pricing model with 1.9% for qualified transactions. You're like, okay, great. And then you go to, somewhere else and they say, oh, we'll make it easy for you. It'll just be a flat rate. It's going to be 2.9%. We'll charge you $20 a month. And, you'll be great. And then you go to someone else and they say, hey, we'll do interchange plus pricing for you. 35 basis points, 7 cents a transaction, great. And you look at all of that and it's like trying to do math in all different units, or getting a lab panel from, your patient with a brand new lab value. And you're like, I don't even know what the ranges are of normal. So,
right.
How do you interpret that information? And so that's where it's helpful to have someone who can explain it to you, who can put it into terms that you understand. And that's what we're here to try to do.
And so if the practice is like, okay, shoot, I'm not looking at this, maybe I need to go find that information. So then they pull that information and they are able to look at it and go, okay, I really just don't even know what this says. How can reaching out to you or someone on your team, how do you guys help, practices or clients make the right decision?
Right. So I can personally look at a merchant statement and glean a little bit of information about it, kind of the basics. But then if we send it off to our analysts, they really deep dive into it and can pick it apart. And they can come back to you and say, hey, you know what, right now you're on a tiered pricing model. These are the 3 tiers that you're paying. And this is how it would compare to what we're doing with interchange plus pricing. And the pricing models kind of giving you a little background of payments 101. I don't want to digress totally from this question, but to give you the background to the payments industry. So every credit card that's out there, a debit card, a rewards card, a points card, a business or corporate card, every card that's out there is charged. You are charged a different rate from the credit card brands. So Visa, MasterCard, Discover, Amex, they all charge a rate to use those cards. Now, your payment processor is the one who's actually doing the work to process those transactions securely and make sure the money goes where it needs to go, because it's going between the bank and the credit card brands and you and the customer. So there are a lot of bits and pieces to this that need to get taken care of, and it has to happen securely. So your processor is the one that does all of that. Now, your processor is covering the costs of those interchange rates from the card brands, and then they're making a profit on it in some form or fashion. Now, if they're charging you flat rate pricing, they're charging you the same rate for every transaction that goes through, regardless of if it's a debit card with like 0.05% interchange rate, or, a points or rewards card at like 2.4% interchange rate. So they're making a profit off of that. And if it's flat rate, more often than not, they're charging you a high enough rate that they are going to, make sure they're not in the red. And
right.
Okay. So flat rate is easy to understand because you just say, you know what, I charged, 10,000 in credit card transactions for the month. I'm going to pay whatever it is, 2.9%, 3.5%. That's what I'm going to pay. I know every month what it is. I totally get it. But just because it's easy to understand doesn't mean that it's best for your business. So then you look at tiered pricing. Tiered pricing is essentially like 3 different flat rates, and the processor can break it up however they want. They can say it's low rate cards, middle rate cards, high rate cards. They can say that it is, if it's Chase Bank, it's Chase cards, non-Chase cards, and something else, however they want to break it up. But the bottom line is that it's still essentially like 3 different flat rates, and you're overpaying for a large portion of those transactions within each tier. And also of note, very often that when you are quoted for a tiered pricing model, they're only quoting you on the lowest tier. So like if you go to Costco and look at their website, I think their tiered pricing, they don't say, they may not even say tiered pricing necessarily in the large print. It will just say 1.9% for qualified purchases or something. So what you need to understand is that most transactions don't fall into that qualified transaction bucket. Most of them are going to run higher. So it's kind of a little bit of false advertising, but if you understand what you're getting, that's the next step. And then interchange plus pricing is breaking it down even further so that every single card that's out there, you're paying only that interchange cost plus the markup for the processor. And so that way you're getting essentially like wholesale rates, wholesale transactions. And so typically for most businesses, and especially in medicine, that's usually our best bet, because we do get a fair amount of debit transactions through FSA and HSA cards. And usually debit transactions are very, very low. So if you're paying a high flat rate and getting a ton of debit transactions, you're definitely overpaying. Now, on the other side of that, let's say you had some sort of business that you accept a lot of business and corporate cards per se, let's say, I don't know what kind of business, a rental company or something like that. It might be in your best interest to be on a flat rate model, because then maybe, you've got a lot of higher rate cards, and you would win out by having a flat rate. So it's not a one size fits all, but in medicine, typically interchange plus pricing is your best bet. That being said, if you get interchange plus pricing, it doesn't necessarily mean that you've got a good rate on your interchange plus pricing, because they could be quoting you, 150 basis points, and another company might quote you 25 basis points. So you need to understand that piece of the puzzle too. So a basis point, just for your reference, is 1/100%. So if you say, 35 basis points, it's 0.35%. So that's where that comes in. So I feel like I got a little off topic talking about that background, but to kind of go back to where we were before, when you were asking about, knowing about this and reaching out to someone, our analysts are able to pick apart all of that for you, tell you what you have, compare it against a fair standard, and say, hey, this is the information, and now you can make the right decision for your business.
And so I love a couple things, right? I love that I now understand flat, tiered, and interchange plus pricing. I feel like I could at least define those. So I feel like score one.
Yes.
Then, which, I mean, it is such a mysterious thing that happens. And, it's just, I don't know, money just goes and comes, and you just think, okay, it's all, okay. But I know that that's not the case. So, and it is something that folks have as an expense. And so, as you're in private practice, as you have a small private practice or even a medium-sized private practice, every single dollar counts. And so are you getting the value for the dollar that you're spending, especially as, reimbursement changes have, come the last decade. It's harder and harder for private practices to stay profitable. And this type of situation and understanding this expense and understanding and shopping around is so critical. So how does this work? Is this something that is completely separate from your EMR, that they, get terminals and it integrates with the EMRs? Talk to me a little bit about that as compared to, say, if you, purchase someone else or partner with someone else that is, that maybe your EMR recommended.
Yeah. So now that we have gone so far in the digital world, almost every practice has an EMR. And I mean, there are still practices out there still using paper. But when you have an EMR, it is very convenient to have your payments integrated into your EMR. Now, it doesn't mean that it's necessary. You can certainly stay what we call decoupled, meaning your payments, your credit card payments from your patients are separate from your EMR. And that's totally fine. There's, extra reconciliation steps when you receive a payment to then go into your EMR and make sure that it's reconciled, that it's paid. But, depending on what your priorities are, like maybe you are a very small practice and you really are prioritizing saving money over that integration piece. And, it's not something that you start that way and you can't change down the road, but maybe initially you want to stay decoupled because it is more cost effective for you. But the integration piece of having your payments go directly into your EMR and everything's in the same system, there's value to that. You do pay for that added value, but again, it's a priority thing for you, depending on what is most important to you, to your practice. So when you're talking about the integration piece, there are ways to do it. So usually an EMR will partner with one particular processor and tie you into that, using that only that processor if you want to integrate with your EMR. Now, things are changing a little bit. Because now there are programs like this Rectangle Health Practice Management Bridge, which can bridge that gap and interface with your EMR. So you are not only limited to the processor that your EMR chooses, because if you stick with just the EMR that your processor, or the processor that your EMR chooses, they kind of have a monopoly on you. They have your hands tied and you're like, okay, great, I'll pay whatever it is you tell me to pay. But now you kind of have this choice where you can look at, a practice management bridge and do a little comparison shopping and see if that solution is more cost effective for you and still give you that convenience of being, connected. So that's a great thing that we are now able to offer as well. And it's pretty much with any Windows-based EMR, we're able to interface through that practice management bridge. The other thing about this is if you have something where you can send out invoices, you can have card on file, which is stored securely. And there are regulations surrounding that. You have to make sure that that card on file program is done securely for both, PCI compliance and HIPAA compliance. But if you have that card on file, you have a way for patients to pay online, so they don't have to just call you during business hours and take a phone payment. And you can collect on bills, with that card on file, then, that's a lot of revenue out there that you can collect on a more timely basis and a more reliable basis. So the value of that is phenomenal as well.
And that brings up a good point, that whole card on file. We have a patient payment policy that we give out to our clients and our listeners, and that helps do two things. So it helps explains to patients, right? What am I paying? What's a copayment? What's coinsurance? What's a deductible? Who sets those rates? And so we kind of walk through that in a policy that we hand to patients that they can sign, and then we keep their credit card on file. At least we suggest that from a practice perspective, so that when bills are overdue, they can automatically charge those. Again, you have to have that as a policy and have them sign it and all the necessary steps in order to do that appropriately. But that really helps keep down that patient AR, that accounts receivable, because what ends up happening is you think, oh, well, it's just $50. It's okay. I'll just deal with it later. And then the patient never comes in, or they forget, or it's not easy to pay. And so they just don't pay. And next thing you know, you've got 15, 20 plus $1,000 sitting in patient AR. And so, it simplifies any sort of collection process that you don't want to have to deal with. So, and I know that a lot of our listeners have been trying to figure out how to store that credit card on file, or what's the best way. And so, are you saying that Park Place has a way to be able to do that securely through your own system?
Yes. Absolutely. So I know I threw out an acronym out there that a lot of you probably don't recognize, PCI, which doesn't stand for percutaneous intervention when you talk about the payment statement. It actually is an acronym that refers to, I kind of describe it as kind of like HIPAA, but for credit cards. So it's securely storing credit card information. And every year you have to do paperwork to verify that you're PCI compliant, meaning that you are not writing down credit card information on a piece of paper, that you don't have a big file cabinet with everyone's credit card information in there. So you want to make sure that you are doing things appropriately. And especially if you're storing this credit card data, it needs to be tokenized, meaning it needs to have a secure, it's changed into a different number that's not associated with the card itself. And so all of that is done securely through the practice management bridge that I was referring to. So you can keep that card on file. And it is important to make sure that it's done properly, because if it's not, you're putting yourself at risk.
That's a good point. And, we oftentimes get asked about, compliance and how that all impacts, your risk as a company. And so it is really important to make sure that you're doing these sort of things, right. If a data breach happens, or if something else happens and you're found to not be doing something appropriately, it just is a liability that you don't want to have to deal with. So that's good that now. And so do you guys manage that annual kind of double check, and that's on you guys, or is that on the practice if they're using your company?
Well, it is a merchant responsibility to maintain PCI compliance. However, we actually are very proactive about hand-holding you through that yearly process. We don't just send out a little tiny piece or reminder at the bottom of a merchant statement that most people don't look at, which is a very common practice. A lot of processors will just put in little tiny print, you're due for PCI compliance, and that's it. And then they wash their hands of it. And part of the reason for that is because there is a required fee. If you're not PCI compliant, the card brands charge a PCI non-compliance fee. Now the processor gets a piece of that, right? So why would they have any incentive to help keep you PCI compliant if that's an easy way to pocket some extra monthly fees, So a lot of companies will not be proactive about PCI compliance. And I've seen local practices, very early on when I started doing this, that were paying $125 a month because they were PCI non-compliant. They had no idea that they were PCI non-compliant. They didn't know what that was. They didn't know how to become PCI compliant. No one was helping them with that. And instead, they're paying an extra $125 a month for that.
Goodness.
And that same practice, interestingly enough, was also paying a monthly PCI compliance fee, presumably to help keep them compliant, right? You would think. So obviously the processor was not doing their job. They're double dipping and charging them to be PCI compliant and then collecting when they're not.
Oh my gosh, that is so frightening to hear all of those things. Okay, so for our listeners, check your merchant processor invoice. Let's look and see if you're paying any PCI compliant fees. And of course, we'll talk about how to get in touch with Dr. Mogan and Park Place in a minute. But I have one last question. So what makes Park Place different compared to other companies? And I feel like you've given so many pearls on this, but if you could sum it up into one punchline, what would that be for our listeners?
I mean, I can sum it up in one word. It's integrity. Really, it's a company that you can trust, that is looking out for you. We guarantee our rates when we quote them. They don't increase over time. You don't have to worry about watching them creep up, which happens a lot with other companies. We have your back, keeping you PCI compliant. And truly, we just want you to be informed and make the right choice for your business.
I love it. I love it. Okay. So you heard it here. So number one, I think everyone should be doing as you're finishing this podcast is going and checking out your merchant processor invoice. That's going to be absolutely critical. And then if you are looking to get in touch with Dr. Mogan or Park Place Payments, please reach out to info@nationalrevenueconsulting.com. I am so excited to have had you on this morning. I think all of this is super important information. Again, I don't think this is anything that we learned when we are going through medical school or any other sort of training. And I would actually even venture to say that even if you got your MBA and you're a CEO of a big company, that it still may not be something that's super transparent. I mean, it just feels like this is this nebulous topic that no one really talks about.
Very true. Very true. You summed it up precisely.
Awesome. Well, I am so glad that you were on this morning. Thank you so much. And for coming and joining RevMD this week. Thanks for joining today. We are starting a movement. If healthcare professionals understand the complexities of medical billing and insurance reimbursement, we can be advocates for our patients and grow our own revenue. If you like this podcast, share it on Facebook and invite others to the Facebook group RevMD.